Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I'll be presenting on President Clinton's foreign policy. All right, let's get started. I long for Bush's vision. Harvard professor George Dominguez declared this in mockery imitation of Bill Clinton, expressing the mood of many critics who have routinely accused President Bill Clinton of being purposefully incoherent with his policies. So this was really a conservative critique, that Bill Clinton didn't have a foreign policy. But really, for all the taunting and all the criticism, we find that that isn't actually true. So maybe in the beginning it was a little bit undefined, but we get to really understand the Clinton consensus at the end of his 2 terms to really define his international policy. So essentially, his international relations policy can be summed up with a policy that is his advisors called the Doctrine of Enlargement. What does this mean? So, the doctrine of enlargement is the idea that economic wealth of our nation is dependent on globalization, free trade, and democracy promotion. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up this quote from Bill Clinton to kind of further explain this. So this is something that Clinton said at the beginning of his term. Everything from the strength of our economy to the safety of our cities to the health of our people depend on events not only within our border, but half a world away. So what does this mean? Really, President Clinton was referring to globalization. So first, Clinton understood that globalization was inevitable and that we must capitalize on it. Its benefits must be harnessed to advance our objectives of democracy, right? Our objectives of shared peace and shared prosperity. And, that was really a smart thing to do. Secondly, in terms of trade, more specifically free trade, in order to increase the United States' economic gain, President Clinton led intense efforts to lower trade and investment barriers, which really allowed for free markets. The last thing on our list is democracy promotion. So lastly, democracy promotion is necessary in order to advance U.S. security and economic interests, from reducing the chances of war to decreasing terrorism. So this really led the United States to be an active global policeman. They became a superpower state player through facilitating multilateral peacekeeping efforts. America cannot and, must not disentangle itself from the world. So if America wants the world to embody their shared values, then they must assume a shared responsibility. And this really makes sense in terms of democracy promotion. All right, let's move on to international trade policy and its historical context. So along with President Clinton's campaign slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," Clinton's trade policy really echoed this idea. So in regards to historical context, in 1992, 10 million Americans were unemployed. New job creation was slow and wages were stagnant. So really, it wasn't looking too great for the economy during this time. In addition, other nations' high trade barriers really limited the ability of American businesses and farmers to sell their goods abroad and hampered economic recovery. So that didn't really help the whole economic situation. At the same time, the Clinton administration also was able to coincide historically with the meeting of technological and political trends. This includes the internet, democratization, open markets, and porous borders. So this was a time in which all these different aspects allowed for the world to come together. So the world was now interconnected and more interconnected than ever. This was an unprecedented level of global integration. So that in this historical context, Clinton was not content to just watch the United States be carried along by current and tides of globalization, right? He wanted to place his flag. He wanted to place this flag there, and more specifically, the American flag. So he instead sought to accelerate and harness these globalization forces to ensure that, he's advancing America. So, as the first president who has understood globalization and the connection to prosperity, President Clinton has led intense efforts for free trade, which is, international trade left to its natural course without tariffs, quotas, or other restrictions. So Clinton really put in a lot of energy to lower trade and investment barriers. This includes completing the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, with Canada and Mexico, and also supporting the creation of the World Trade Organization. So, this NAFTA really eliminated trade barriers between US, Canada, and Mexico. Additionally, in terms of theory, Clinton believed in the classical theory of free trade, that a lower tariff would result in lower prices, greater exports, and a stronger economy. So NAFTA really echoed this. As NAFTA is set to eliminate barriers to trade and investment, the implementation of NAFTA on January 1st of 1994, it brought immediate elimination of tariffs on more than one half of Mexico's tariffs onto the US and more than 1/3 of US exports to Mexico. So this is just an example of how much NAFTA really eliminated those barriers. This opened up to a lot of prosperity economically for the US. This led the US towards its greatest expansion in world trade in history, from 4 to 6.6 trillion in just 1 year. So it just really opened markets for the United States exports abroad. It created American jobs with nearly 300 other free and fair trade agreements. So this really contributed to the largest and longest economic expansion in our history, which is really great. Additionally, the economic benefits of the tariff reductions that were negotiated during the Clinton administration represents the largest tax cut in the world. So that's also something that's really interesting as well. All right, let's move away from trade. Okay, so liberalism theory of international relations. What theory does the Clinton administration really reflect in terms of international relations? Well, it's liberalism. With his strong push for democracy promotion, Clinton's policy really echoes the idea of international liberalism, that international diplomacy can be a very effective way to get states to interact with each other honestly and support nonviolent solutions to the problems. This is, of course, with proper institutions and diplomacy. This theory believes that states can work together to maximize prosperity and minimize conflict. So Clinton really stressed the liberalism idea, and aligned with his own support of the democratic peace theory, that states are rational, and if they're democratic, they seek peace in the long run, avoiding wars with other democratic states, which will continue to contribute to global economy and benefiting the US. That's this idea of democratic peace theory, that democratic states are less likely to conflict with each other, really supports this whole liberalism idea. So, this idea of democracy promotion, fueled by the idea of international liberalism, is supported by several actions. Firstly, as an example, in Latin America, the Clinton administration supported ongoing transitions to democracy and market economics in the belief that a democratic, prosperous hemisphere would best serve U.S. security interests. So this effort continued in Russia and China, where the president implemented efforts to ensure that democratic ideals were being enforced in these countries. Secondly, the liberalism case for diplomatic intervention can be supported by a few other Clinton administration actions, a little bit different than the previous ones, not necessarily democracy promotion, but more so, peacekeeping. So from sending U.S. troops to Haiti and Bosnia during the 1990s to stop conflicts within those nations, participating in convincing NATO to really take action in the bombing of Kosovo in 1990 because of human rights violations, negotiating the exit of Russian troops from the Baltics, winning Russia's active support for an end to the Kosovo War, helping maintain peace in the Taiwan Straits, and working with China to maintain stability in the Korean Peninsula, and really helping forge agreements that led to the Declaration of Principles in Palestine. For Palestinian self-rule in September 1995. So these are some of the things that he's done in terms of really implementing the ideal of liberalism in the theory of international relations. All right, successes of international liberalism. So these are aspects of that theory that have really succeeded. So what were some of the successes? Let's talk about them. So first, he succeeded in breaking new ground in 1993 by welcoming European and Asian allies' desire to play a more responsible role while maintaining American troops, and adapting allies in both regions, which is very characteristic of international liberalism, right? Kind of encouraging these other allies to also do the same job of seeking peace and avoiding war and being rational state players, supporting nonviolent solutions. Okay, let me just scroll back down. Okay. All right, sorry about that. All right, we're gonna move right along. Exactly. So another example is that Clinton managed to advance peace in the Middle East by brokering peace agreements between Israel and its neighbors. So this includes Palestinians and Jordan. So, they led diplomatic efforts to end the civil war and foster a multi-ethnic democracy in Bosnia. Restored democracy in Haiti, where, it ended military dictatorship and stopped refugee flows. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, the administration helped broker the Good Friday Peace Accord. So this really ended decades of bloodshed and it empowered the people of Northern Ireland to determine their own future. Lastly, another last example that I have is that the Clinton administration brought an end to what was at that time the largest conventional war on earth, with the final comprehensive peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia, amongst other interactions to promote world peace. So these are really successes of this ideology of international liberalism that was incorporated into the administration as an international policy. Okay. All right, so what are some failures? Obviously, you can't have all the successes, right? There's things that are bound to go, unfavorably. And there were quite many things. So the first thing was that democracy promotion, this whole idea of expanding democratic values to all these different countries, this idealistic reasoning seemed, to be great, spreading ethical, moral values of democracy, but it was really guided by self-interest, right? And the ultimate goal of this was to increase the economic strength of the United States. So what initially was promoted as international liberalism kind of looks like semi-realism. So it's not really about the whole ideology anymore. It's really about self-interest. So let's take China, for example. The administration's 1994 decision to de-link human rights and trade effectively meant that human rights, and by that extension democracy, would stay at least important on China's political agenda, pushing the idea of economy and, the prosperity of economy to the top of the agenda. Really kind of ignoring that whole rally for human rights. So, as the administration intensified its push to rebuild the Chinese and U.S. relations on the basis of commercial engagement, Clinton officials really played up the idea that this increased U.S. trade and investment in China would be an important force for political liberalization. So they're just trying to, they kind of made this as an excuse for all this economic, heavy investment. But this idea might have some validity in the long term. It is pretty obvious still that the Clintons' China policy is primarily about economics and that the democracy promotion just kind of added as a sideliner. Another example is in Indonesia. The administration maintained a long-standing U.S. friendship with President Suharto, reflecting the U.S.'s own views that Suharto is a politically flawed, but nonetheless valuable economic and security partner. So, obviously the U.S. valued President Suharto of Indonesia as an economic and security partner, and it kind of placed its own values of democracy promotion aside. So it's kind of seeing some conflicting things over here. Meanwhile, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other Middle Eastern countries, this administration has preserved close U.S. ties with autocratic regimes. So that's a total opposite of a democracy, right? It goes directly against this ideology. And only because they serve the U.S. interests on oil. The Arab as a really peace processes and resistant to Islamic fundamentalist groups. So because they served U.S. interests, especially these economic interests and other international interests, we were able to kind of overlook the fact that they served, they had ideas that were, totally opposite of democracy. Really kind of hypocritic in our sense, in the Clinton administration's sense, and which I kind of listed as a failure. Other times, if it's not exactly, let me rephrase that. So other times, idealism for democracy didn't find utility in reality. So it wasn't realistic. It, in fact, backfired. For example, the democracy promotion in Russia encountered substantial limitations and tensions in practice. So supporting democracy became a policy of supporting Yeltsin. This really put the administration in some awkward positions. You're downplaying large-scale Russian human rights violations in the first war of Chechnya, and you're essentially, praising a presidential election marked by flaws from the 1996 election, and you're alienating various parts of the Russian democratic political spectrum that's not associated with the Yeltsin or, their favored group groups of reformers. So they really kind of ignored critical points of this, such as the human rights, to kind of support this larger ideal. And that kind of it backfires. It backfires on the moral and ethical responsibility in terms of international liberalism. So another example that I would say as a failure is, meanwhile, in other parts of Africa, United States will give some attention to their democracy, or the promotion of the democracy in African countries out of a general idealistic impulse, that they should, but they wouldn't really commit major financial or human resources to the task because they don't see a lot of economic gain there. They don't see a lot of incentive there. So it is hypocritical, to say that that same rule doesn't apply everywhere just because there's not much of an incentive. So in summary, the failures of international liberalism in the Clinton administration was really the effort in democracy promotion, varying according to whatever appeared to fit well with the U.S. security and economic interests. So where democracy clashed with other significant interests, it was often downplayed or even ignored, as can be seen with Africa and in China. All right, let's move on to what worked. So what worked? In terms of trade policy, opening the market to globalization was a huge success. So, as the first president who really understood the connection of global economy and the connection to prosperity, President Clinton pushed through Congress 2 new massive trade agreements. So that really was NAFTA and also a revision of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1994. So this allowed for Clinton to really open the markets for U.S. exports abroad, and it created a lot of American jobs through nearly 300 other free and fair trade agreements. What was the result? The result was strong economic growth. Since the administration took over, there was a 4% growth each year compared to the average growth of 2.8% during the Reagan-Bush years. So this is great. And the economy has grown for 116 consecutive months, which is the most in the American history. Another result, abundant new jobs. So the economy created more than 22.5 million jobs in less than 8 years. That's the most jobs created under a single administration. So in addition to that, unemployment was also at the lowest level in more than 30 years. So the overall unemployment dropped from 6.9% down to just 4%. 6.9% was already very low. It was the lowest level in 30 years. To have that drop to 4% is just an amazing accomplishment. And a lot of it was really due to this trade. Also, there were also elements of international liberalism, specifically in its peacemaking, that was also successful. So some of the successful peacemaking deals that I haven't mentioned before include in Yugoslavia, where he really pushed NATO to do its part in policing by bombing and sending troops during the Kosovo War. Also semi-successfully with the Oslo Accords, when Israel recognized the legitimacy of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as well as with successfully persuading Russia to withdraw troops from the Baltic republics of Estonia and Latvia in 1994. So these were some other successes that was a part of what worked in terms of his international policy. So in terms of democracy promotion, Bill Clinton also succeeded in some areas. In 1990, we saw tremendous growth in democracy promotion activities. So experts really attributed this to a low threat perception and a global wave of democratic transitions. And there's no strong ideological rival to this Western liberal democracy. And this really kind of fed the fuel to Clinton's promotion of democracy. And this idea became deeply integrated into the U.S. foreign policy structure even after the Clinton years. So Clinton created a Democracy and Governance Office at USAID, and the Office of Transition Initiatives. So this is to take advantage of opportunities for democracy in countries that are in transition. So this has become implemented into U.S. foreign policy structure. That's the kind of legacy that this president had. Meanwhile, in Congress, they established the State Department's Human Rights and Democracy Fund in 1998, which the state describes as its venture capital fund for democracy and human rights. So this isn't just, from the executive branch, it's trickled down into the legislative branch, which is really a great impact for this president to have in terms of democracy promotion. All right, so let's move on to what didn't work. You know, there are a few things on here that is just heartbreaking, right? So some of his largest failures of international policy, we really got to zero in on the Rwandan genocide. So he did nothing to help with the Rwandan genocide, which resulted in 800,000 people dying in 1 month. So when speaking about the Rwandan crisis, Clinton called it his worst failure, admitting, "I blew it." Those were his exact words, "I blew it." And you know what? I think the world couldn't agree more. It makes sense. So in terms of a peace negotiation, despite his mighty sum of peace agreements, there still existed untied loose ends, such as the Middle Peace Treaty remains accomplished by the Clinton's administration. You know, Israelites and Palestinians are still deadlocked. Additionally, his efforts of democracy promotion became more relevant in countries where there was economic gain to be made, and lesser efforts were put into countries of less promises of prosperity. This can really be seen in large parts of Africa. So he really kind of was hypocritical with that whole democracy promotion, right? Although it did happen in some countries, other countries that seemed to offer less in terms of economic or international benefits didn't seem to prosper from democracy promotion. All right, so in conclusion, what sort of world has Bill Clinton wrought? So he has painstakingly assembled an impressive framework of policy to promote global peace and prosperity, through a strong belief in globalization and the encouragement of the interdependence of nations to develop the world economy. Clinton was able to pass through trade agreements that greatly benefit the economy and decrease unemployment in America. So although often the motives seemed obviously out of America's self-interest, Bill Clinton's international liberalism and his fight for democracy promotion has allowed many countries to become more democratic, its citizens enjoying freedoms and natural rights. Clinton has interwoven into American history and into its future new ideas of transitioning countries to democracy, the benefits of free trade, and the necessity of globalization and our independence upon other world players. So it looks like it's more than just the economy, stupid. Thank you for listening. Bill Clinton says hi.